In this video, we are going to discuss Freytag's pyramid, which you will use for your written responses as well as in your final major assignment. Freytag's pyramid is a dramatic structural framework developed by Gustav Freytag, a German playwright and novelist of the mid-19th century. It was created in 1863, and with it he theorized that effective stories, or texts, could be broken into two halves, what he considered the play and the counterplay, with the climax in the middle. These two halves created a pyramid or triangle shape containing 5 dramatic elements, which we will go over in this video. In order to help us understand these elements, we will discuss them in layers, adding additional information with each pass. So as we can see on the outset, just looking at the visual that was created for this video, it does form a sort of pyramid or triangle shape. And just starting off, we have the setting, which moves us into the setup, the rising action, which brings us to the very top, which is going to be the climax. And then, as we are moving downward, we have the falling action, which ends in the resolution. So this is the very first layer. This is very basic. We've just thrown a bunch of terms at you, and you might be saying, I really don't know what any of these things mean. So now we're going to add another layer in order to deepen our understanding. So we're going to start at the beginning with the setting. So here we have the opening scene, an introduction of character or characters, and that's often going to be the protagonist, the main character that we're going to be following throughout the course of the text. Now we move into the setup, and this is going to be an initiating event, some kind of exposition that is going to occur. Now, in terms of what is an initiating an event, this is either an idea or an action that sets further events in motion. This is where things really start to get good, as a lot of people might consider it in that respect. Now, moving into the rising action, this is where there is some kind of internal response, attempt, complications, conflict, subclimaxes, maybe subplots that are going on, or even potentially some turning points with respect to those characters, those initial events that we got in that setup. Now, defining some of those terms with an internal response, this is the protagonist's internal reaction to the initiating event, in which the protagonist sets a goal or attempts to solve a problem. An attempt is where the protagonist's efforts to achieve the goal or alleviate the problem. Several attempts, some failed, may be needed in, an episode if we're talking about a TV show, a short story, a play, a novel. We want to keep in mind that this is applicable to pretty much any text that we might take a look at. Now we get to the climax, and this is where we are coming to the outcome. An outcome is the success or failure of the protagonist's attempts. Now, as we go into that falling action, this is where, if we're coming off of a potential success, or a failure, where we're going to see that change happen, moving us into the resolution and the reaction. A resolution is an action or state of affairs that evolves from the protagonist's success or failure to achieve the goal or alleviate the problem. Now, a reaction is an idea, an emotion, or a further event that expresses the protagonist's feelings about the success or failure of goal attainment or problem resolution, or that relates the events in the story to some broader set of concerns. So all of these things are kind of working together, and we have yet another layer where we're going to further discuss this to hopefully help this to make sense, because you're going to be using this when you are writing your reactions, your reading responses, as well as part of your final major assignment. So this is something that is going to be used throughout the course of this semester, and you are definitely welcome to visit, or revisit, I should say, this video as necessary in order to help you with the different terms that are being used. So now that we have gone through each of these elements using the diagram, let's walk through them again with some additional context. So we begin with the introduction. The introduction of a text contains both the exposition and the exciting force. The exposition, this is a scene in which no major changes occur, and the point is to introduce the main characters, time period, tone, and to set up that exciting force. The exciting force, Freytag also calls this the complication, and other frameworks call it the inciting event, is when some force of will on the part of the protagonist or an outside complication forces the protagonist into motion. So that is where we're kind of moving into that setup. Now we have the rising action. Now that the chief action has been started, the story builds in action towards the climax. Any characters who have not been introduced are usually introduced at this point, which moves us into the climax. In Freytag's framework, the climax occurs in the middle of the story. But as I mentioned, as we look at that length of that first leg, of the pyramid or the triangle, it is significantly longer. So it might not occur exactly in the middle. It might be 2/3 of the way through or more, depending on how the author decides to put that together. In this framework, the climax can be thought of as a reflection point. If things have gone well for the protagonist, at the climax they start to fall apart. If things have gone poorly for the protagonist, things start improving. The climax is the point at which the story reflects and afterwards becomes the mirror story, the counterplay. But rather than just focus on the fate of the protagonist, the climax is the scene or group of scenes in which the fullest energy of the protagonist is portrayed, whether for good or bad. After the climax, whatever ambition the protagonist showed is often reversed against themselves, and whatever suffering they endured is redeemed, leading us into that falling action. In the falling action, things continue to either develop or improve for the protagonist, or maybe if we're looking at something that's, say, like a comedy, they might improve, leading up to a moment before the resolution when the author projects the final resolution and prepares the audience for it. Often, just after this foreshadowing, there must be a moment of suspense where the slim possibility exists of a reversal. Now, as we head into that resolution, Freytag saw the ending phase of a story as the beginning with a moment of catastrophe in which the main character is finally undone by their own choices, actions, and/or energy. After the catastrophe is a moment of catharsis, healing, where the action of the story is resolved, we have the resolution, and the tension releases as the audience takes in the final outcome. So we also have that reaction going on in there. So hopefully, as we have, through three different layers, three different, kind of explanations of this same pyramid, has given you some tools that you're going to be able to use as you are putting together your responses, which will lead into your final assignment. So when you are discussing your reactions or responses, you can think about where a element that caused you to have a reaction occurred. Did it occur in the setting, the setup, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, the resolution? And what does where your reaction or your response, where it occurred within this pyramid, what sort of implications, what kind of connections can you make to the importance of the actual text itself?